welcome to another episode of Inspired. I'm Sarah Loudon from Total Health Conferencing, and tonight we're going to be getting to know a little more about Dr. Al Benson. When I first asked to interview Dr. Benson and we were gathering all the information about him and his career and pulling bios, I have to say that I just want to kind of show the viewing audience, this was the shortened, abbreviated bio. So I won't go through all of this because throughout the interview, we'll get to know him more and more. But I think the audience definitely will come to appreciate why he's someone we want to know more about, because his life has really spoken volumes about his influence and impact in cancer care, both from a personal place of managing a clinic all the way to how he's impacting policy, pathways, guidelines, clinical research, all the things that pave the way for tomorrow. So I'm joined by Dr. Al Benson, who's professor of medicine in the Division of Hematology and Oncology at Northwestern University and director for cooperative groups at the Robert H. Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center. His research is primarily in the areas of gastrointestinal cancer, cancer clinical trials, biologic therapies, phase 1 cancer clinical trials, and cancer guideline development. Dr. Benson, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
Well, we always try to make this really relaxed. I grew up with a dad who himself was a doctor, and he had doctors all around him. So I've come up with the good or bad habit of calling people doc. I hope that it's okay if I can do that with you tonight to make it a little bit more informal and get right into the interview. So growing up, tell us a little bit about where you're originally from, and then where you fall in line with brothers and sisters, and maybe a little bit about what your parents did.
So I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and stayed in Buffalo throughout medical school when I then left for my residency program. So I'm a Buffalonian, and I am the eldest, and my two sisters will agree that I have the first child syndrome, I think. And my parents, unfortunately, my father had a severe heart condition and died early at a young age. And that was, you know, a particularly hard time because he was ill for a number of years. But before that, he was a businessman, and in fact, part of my family history, my father for a while, but my grandfather was an executive with McKesson. Wow. In terms of the pharmaceutical industry, and my father's side of the family is from the South, and people in Kentucky had pharmacies. So that's part of my background. And my mother was a department store buyer, a position she took after she graduated from the University of Wisconsin, and actually lived in Chicago for a while before she had a promotion to have a position in Buffalo. My father, who had lived in a number of different cities, was in Buffalo at the time, and they met. And although my mother also took a very extended break from work to help raise her 3 children, but she was also incredibly active in the public school system. So, for example, she was president of my grade school PTA as well as high school, And so I think what was instilled as just critically important in growing up was education from both of my parents. And they wanted to make sure that we went to the best schools and were constantly supportive in our educational endeavors. In my neighborhood, which was fairly close to the University of Buffalo, there were many university professors, physicians, and so forth. So that enforced, I think, the importance of education, and certainly provided some great role models for me growing up.
Were you a good student? Was that just a natural being a good student, or was it that you, because of the emphasis that your parents put on education, it made it kind of more of a priority in your early life?
I think it was always a priority, and I think part of that was because I can't imagine a time when I didn't want to be a physician. And so the message was that, and I don't think it was undue pressure, you know. It was just creating an environment where reading and writing and taking school seriously was critically important. But there was the underlying message, well, if you want to achieve a goal of being a physician, there are important milestones you have to reach that goal.
Right.
So I actually think for my wife and I, my wife is a chemistry professor, but I think for our own children, we tried to instill the importance of education, but at the same time, not trying to be, you know, placing them in a pressure cooker, you know, just the emphasis that education can be a joy, learning is a joy, and that's the type of environment I grew up in.
How old were you when your dad's condition kind of worsened to the point where it was chronic, and then how old were you when you lost him?
His health really deteriorated, I would say around 7th and 8th grade and through high school, but he died when I was in college.
And was that, especially for the oldest, I'm the oldest too, of 4, so I know the oldest syndrome, but was that difficult for you to kind of balance all the different things that were happening, as well as keeping that focus and emphasis on your educational goals?
I think my parents tried to normalize the situation as much as possible, and I think it's similar. Anyone who is exposed to an individual with chronic disease, that you grow accustomed, you live with it. I think that although there might be a concern that someone will not survive, I don't feel that was always a constant stress on us. We just knew it was a difficult heart condition, and, you know, he certainly had to adjust his life to that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you from the beginning knew that you wanted to be a doctor. knowing that and kind of going through all of those milestones that they emphasized you'd have to meet in order to get to the right schools and pursue the career you wanted to, was that an easy path for you? Meaning, did you kind of line up always the next step where you wanted to go to school, where you wanted to train? And then when did becoming an oncologist become clear?
Well, when I was growing up, you know, in the 50s and 60s, you know, there was certainly an era of the neighborhood schools. So, you know, my schools were right there. In fact, with my own children, we've been very fortunate because they too could go to neighborhood schools, walk to school, and I do think that created sense of community. You know, there were lots of kids in my neighborhood. Everyone went to the same schools. The schools were public schools and recognized for excellence, which is why I think we lived where we did, because of the educational experience. And as I mentioned, for my parents, that was pretty important that we went to school. So, for example, my grade school was very small, so we had tremendous individual attention. My high school was quite large, but the programs, it had an honors program, which was quite intense and, again, kind of fostered learning. So I think the environment I was in was one that learning shouldn't be a stress, but should be something that you really enjoy. And you know, that's what I experienced growing up. You know, school wasn't necessarily a burden.
Yeah. And so going into your medical school, when you were kind of finishing and then choosing rotations to pursue, was it clear right away you wanted to be in internal medicine? Did you ever think that you would do something different, or what kind of shaped those choices?
No, I actually wasn't very sure, although my first exposure to oncology was in grade school because, you know, clear giants in their field, James and Jimmy Holland, lived in my neighborhood, and their kids went to my school. And one of my memories is James Holland bringing some mice with tobacco tars and talking about the risk of cancer development. And in fact, years later, it was such a joy. The ACCC was giving an award for Jimmy Holland for her work in the field of psycho-oncology, and it was a privilege to have dinner with her and kind of relive life in Buffalo, and to tell her that story. So that was kind of my first exposure to oncology, as well as knowing about Roswell Park in Buffalo, and certainly in medical school. I spent some time there, but in college, I was very fortunate to have a summer job at the VA hospital, and it was working in the Department of Psychiatry with what was called a student companion program. And my job was to work with students and to be companions to psychiatric patients. And for quite a long time, I thought, well, maybe that would be a good field for me. This was the era during the Vietnam War. So we actually worked with a lot of Vietnam veterans, including at least one person I knew from high school. And, you know, it was a great experience. It taught me a lot about stresses that people endure. Certainly, some of the horrors of being in a war zone. Heard many of those type of stories. And even in medical school, I worked with some of the psychologists, and actually I spent a portion of my senior year in medical school at Stanford in child and adolescent psychiatry. At one point during that period of time, I was thinking, well, maybe I would do adolescent medicine and be boarded in internal medicine and in pediatrics. But I think in medical school, you know, I really enjoyed internal medicine. And so decided that was the course I would take. I had some good exposure to oncology, although that wasn't my immediate choice. And I think it was during residency at the University of Wisconsin with people like Paul Carbone and Tom Davis and Skip Trump. And I mean, I worked with some great people who kindled my interest in oncology.
You know, it's so funny because as we interview more and more thought leaders from this generation, the names who mentored them or the names who inspired them to be in the field all have such commonality. And it makes me think how passionate those people were in building kind of the body of evidence and of kind of treatment paradigms and all of these things to get all these young minds interested, not just interested, but interested to the point where they were ready to kind of put their stake in the ground saying, this is what I want to do. And what is so, I think, ironic about that is every time I interview young, up and coming doctors right out of training, so many of them were influenced by your generation, where it's like, now you moved from all of this curiosity of what could be to the demonstration of learning and acceleration and like all these amazing things where this, you know, the people straight out of training are saying the sky's the limit. Like we have to imagine it, we have to test it, we have to prove it, and we can change lives. And I think it's almost unique, I would say, in oncology. I mean, you don't see that same level of intricacy and passion and accelerated development in dermatology or some of the other medical specialties. And, you know, maybe a lot of that is because there's so much on the line for patients throughout their cancer journey. Do you feel that mentoring, both by people you're mentored from and by people you mentor, do you think that that's a key to bringing the right minds into the oncology space?
Well, I think everyone needs guidance. And I think I have been extraordinarily fortunate, certainly throughout my educational and training experiences. Even in grade school, there are teachers I think of who had a profound influence because they took an interest. As I said, I went to a very small grade school, so we had lots of interaction. And the same in high school, and absolutely in medical school, and during my residency and fellowship training. And these individuals served as models, and I have tried to learn from that. So with my own residents and fellows and more less senior colleagues, try to serve that role. And part of it is not only to offer encouragement and be a sounding board, but also to look for opportunities. There's much to be said with being in the right place at the right time. And part of that is looking to see what opportunities might hold fruit. Clearly not every opportunity turns out as you might wish, but I think back, just looking at NCCN, when NCCN was established, it wasn't completely clear how the organization would evolve, but the founders clearly developed insight and a vision, and we had some great people like Roger Wind, whom we call the father of the guidelines, who, just set the right tone. Yeah. and worked with people, and the rest is kind of history. But getting involved with a project like that, it's perhaps a bit of a gamble. You don't really know where it will go, but the concept sounded interesting, and fortunately it worked out well. Yeah. But there are lots of examples of that, trying to find things of great interest and pursuing them and having the motivation to moving them forward. And I think that's what a mentor can offer for people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely agreed. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with the NCCN, it's the National Comprehensive Cancer Network that was developed to standardize or to provide kind of clinical guidelines that are very heavily rooted in data, so that there would be guardrails, especially since oncology is this ever-evolving practice of medicine, balancing science and art with patients that come up in clinic with various presentations of disease. The NCCN regulates that by reviewing on an annual, maybe even multiple times a year basis, important data sets that help advance clinical care. And Dr. Benson, I believe you are the chair of the GI group for the NCCN. And so it's always panels of experts that evaluate this information and then standardize some of those guidelines for now international use. So absolutely, when you think of something like the NCCN and the early seed planted and then look to see what it is now, it's kind of incredible. Doc, what about, maybe talk with us a little bit about your family. You mentioned that your wife is a chemistry professor. What about children? What do they do? Where are they?
Both of my children are married. They live out east. In fact, my daughter will soon deliver our first grandchild. So
congratulations.
That's very exciting. Yes, very exciting. My daughter trained as an architect, and she also obtained a master's in international affairs, and she has had several positions, most recently serving as director for affordable housing in New York City. And currently now she has her own company, and she says that her goal is to establish her own NGO in the area of affordable housing. So we'll see how that evolves. And my son is in public health, and he works for an NGO organization with the interest in tobacco cessation.
Okay.
So that's what he's doing now.
And do they both live near each other on the East Coast?
No,
Okay.
no, unfortunately, no.
Well, with the new, it's, with COVID and everything, it's going to be tricky to get access to that little baby. But I'm sure with Zoom, you might just sleep with your computer screen on, watching the little one sleep and play and gurgle and all the other wonderful things that babies do right away.
Well, we are hoping to be there for the delivery, so we're going to try.
Amazing, wonderful, wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about some work things, and then we'll go back and ask a few more questions about life. What are some things that, when you look at your career to date, that you say that was something, that thing, that research trial, that meeting, that, outside of obviously the NCCN being something so significant, but that, chairing that research group, what would be something that you would say that's going to be part of my legacy?
Well, I have a variety of interests, as you alluded to. Certainly, GI cancer clinical trials, and for many years I was the chair of the ECOG-ACRIN GI committee, and now I'm a deputy chair of ECOG-ACRIN, and certainly working with the cooperative groups has been an absolute essential component of my career development. And for many years, Paul Carbone was the chair of ECOG, and being at Wisconsin during fellowship, I was exposed to ECOG right from the get-go of my oncology career. And when I went to Northwestern, ECOG was the principal cooperative group for the Cancer Center. So certainly I'm very indebted to ECOG-ACRIN and just magnificent colleagues. And that certainly gave me the opportunity to help design a number of clinical trials, including trials that defined or helped define the role of oxaliplatin and bevacizumab in colon cancer. More recently, looking at drug development in neuroendocrine tumors. So I'm not sure that there is one absolute trial within ECOG-ACRIN that was a defining moment, but there were certainly a number that helped inform the standard of care. And I certainly encourage people to, for example, our junior faculty to participate in the cooperative groups, because it's not easy. It's not easy moving trials forward, but it's certainly a great opportunity to meet a lot of people across the country. Mm-hmm. I would also say at NCCN has been one of my most favorite activities, and that's also another organization with great people. The staff is phenomenal, and in fact, I think the success of is not only the vision and the guidance but the incredible expertise of the staff and the way people work so well together. And for me, I think the work environment, the ability to interact well with people is essential. And one of the reasons I've spent my whole faculty academic career at Northwestern is because the people in my GI group are fantastic. And through Northwestern, I've had the opportunity to participate in activities such as ACCC and NCCN. It was my privilege to serve as the NCCN chair of the board, as well as a panel chair, and also the opportunity to participate in the international program. Most recently, this has included Sub-Saharan Africa and Bolivia and the Caribbean, where our goal is to try to work with oncologists in those areas to harmonize the guidelines and to make them resource specific, as well as providing a vision as to where oncology might move forward in these countries where resources are incredibly limited. And that's been just a wonderful experience working with people from around the world with the common goal to provide better access, better cancer care access to people where such may be extremely limited. And I think this whole concept of comprehensive care delivery is essential in the U.S. One of my projects with ACCC is exploring comprehensive care delivery and how to make it accessible to more people, including how to make sure all the essential elements of comprehensive care are available to people. And we know that there are regional differences, that not everybody has that access. We've seen recently with COVID the tremendous disparities that exist in the United States. And that's certainly true when it comes to delivering cancer care. And so working with organizations that are trying to improve the ability to provide appropriate cancer care has been certainly one of my goals. And I've been extremely fortunate to be given the time from my work at Northwestern to participate with these organizations.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking, so my mother is a nurse from Trinidad, and my dad was a cardiologist from England, and they met. My dad fell off a motorcycle, and my mom was his nurse. She was training in England to become a nurse, and so he fell in love with her. And, you know, just like how you were mentioning how the two worlds collided with your parents in Buffalo. So my dad was also a mission doctor half the year, every year, really until he passed away from a heart attack when he was 60. But all the exposure that I had to the Caribbean from both my family side and just kind of being involved with projects that my dad was involved with. Fast forward to a few years ago, a group of young doctors in Trinidad said, you know, we'd love to be able to work on harmonizing these guidelines in the region. And so, you know, hearing on your end the kind of passion and commitment and purpose where you see the NCCN has impact in all of these global communities, and then knowing on my side that relatives in Trinidad and all over the region in the Caribbean, St. Lucia, Barbados, Antigua, will have not just a different level of access to care because of standardization, but access to the cancer care community of experts here in the United States through the NCCN network. Relatives that once might have been diagnosed with a cancer and been left to kind of go through a very fractured system now have alignment. And so seeing how those two worlds collide, where, you know, I'm here interviewing you for the podcast, but I have had people work with the NCCN on the harmonization of the guidelines, as well as family members that, you know, are going through cancer care. It makes the world so much smaller, and it makes you realize that the things we do and the things we give our investment to have this lasting, magnificent effect on the global community now and in the future. So I have to say, you know, knowing it from both sides of the table and then hearing you with pride talk about it, I can tell you without a doubt, your efforts in helping to develop and standardize and outreach with the NCCN framework works, and it's so meaningful. And so hopefully that adds to kind of the pride you feel in the way your work and your passions kind of reach the global cancer community.
Well, I would also emphasize this is really a partnership, and during the process of harmonizing guidelines, we also learn from our colleagues. You know, these are folks who are very well trained. They're very knowledgeable. And it's really a resource issue, and they are trying to expand oncology, you know, develop more oncologists in the region, and try to make sure that these resources can evolve over time. And you know, we take back to our panels information we hear from colleagues around the world. And so that's also what's great about this exchange. You know, we're really working together in a partnership with common goals. Yeah. And it really shows that in some respects, oncology is a small world where people are working from the same databases, the same evidence-based literature, and it's just a matter of how do we bring this forward for our patients. And as I said, in the United States, we still have significant problems with access and delivering the type of care we should be. Yeah. And so I think these goals are fairly universal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so let's kind of pivot back to personal. What kinds of things, when you're not, especially probably now during COVID, when you're not working, when you're not reading or writing, when you're not reviewing papers, what does the at-home Al Benson like to do?
Well, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of time. My wife and I certainly love to travel. In fact, a great disappointment this year, we had our trip lined up for traveling to visit Machu Picchu, which was on our bucket list, and that had to be canceled. So maybe next year, but you know, we have traveled extensively, and you know, certainly because our families are so dispersed all over the country, we we like to travel and visit family. For many, many years, my wife's family has had family reunions, mostly out west, different places. So, we really try to maintain links with friends and family in any way we can. I think I am a frustrated photographer and artist and completely untrained, so it's a bit of a hobby. Some of that stems from in college, I was the managing editor of the University of Buffalo student newspaper, which came out 3 times a week. So it was a large paper, and there again was an opportunity to work with phenomenal people. A number of them are very successful journalists now. But I got to do some artwork and also photography, even though I wrote and edited for the paper and helped supervise a fairly large staff, which I think also gave me some very valuable skills and lessons for a medical career, since in medicine we have to do a lot of reporting.
Yes.
We have to find the facts, and we have to synthesize the information to put it all together. And certainly, in journalism, teaching writing skills, and so that was a phenomenal episode of my life. Plus, it was, a very challenging time because that was the Vietnam War, and this was late 60s, early 70s. So it was kind of in the thick of all of this.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you think about the really significant seasons in the United States, I feel like we're obviously going through one now with the pandemic, but just too with the issues that the pandemic has kind of not necessarily uncovered, but brought to the forefront, with equity, with equality, with access, and just kind of our political system. But when you think of times in life, I think that late 60s, early 70s period certainly had the ability to mark people. And in line with that, during your clinical career, what have been, or maybe can you give us an example of a case or a patient experience that has marked you significantly, where you kind of have that thing as, I'll never forget that?
Yeah, I don't know if there is a single individual, other than I would say, I mentioned the student companion program at the VA. A particular person I went to high school with, which was, an enormous challenge, but, that just sits in my mind as if it was yesterday. I think, being a GI medical oncologist, it's an immensely challenging field. I think some of our most difficult cases are those with difficult to resolve problems secondary to their tumors, such as pain and bowel obstructions. And so it includes a great deal of work in supportive care and palliative care. That aspect has given me very early on great respect for our palliative care colleagues. And at Northwestern, we work hand in hand. Certainly our GI group works on a daily basis with our palliative care team, and we try to instill, certainly during teaching rounds and otherwise with our residents and fellows, how critically important this aspect of care is. And this is certainly something that's evolved during my career, and what a big difference this has made. Also, and what I like about GI oncology in general is it's very multidisciplinary. And so our difficult cases typically need multidisciplinary input. And so at our weekly multidisciplinary GI oncology conference, we discuss incredibly difficult problems and put our heads together as a real team to try to solve these problems and help as best we can. It's not all gloom and doom though, because we can also help a lot of individuals. One area that's been fascinating is the field of neuroendocrine tumors and how that's evolved, and the growing interest and the ability to do treatments. For example, the use of yttrium-90, lutetium-177 for patients with receptor-positive neuroendocrine tumors. My group was part of the NETTER trial that led to the FDA approval of that treatment, which has certainly been one of the most successful treatments for this disease entity. So, we certainly have successes, and we're constantly seeing improvement in survivorship and outcomes for our GI patients, which in and of itself has been rewarding.
And what, when you're thinking about kind of the body of work that you have, whether it be, during clinic days, in the academic pursuits that you have, in clinical trials and mentoring and in leadership within the division, what brings you joy in work? Like, what can you always count on that brings you joy?
I think it's really what I mentioned about the interaction with people at every level. And I have been very fortunate to work with great people. And so when we're in the workroom together, it's just a very collegial, friendly environment. Everyone on the same page, and trying our best, and able to provide a really multidisciplinary approach where we're making an effort to provide comprehensive cancer care. And I think our patients sense that we're willing to bring in our whole team to help whatever aspect of their care is needed, whether it's the pharmacist, the dietitian, the financial counselor, the social worker, the psychologist. We really try to make that effort as a team. And so it's my immediate team in GI medical oncology, including my physician colleagues, where we just work together. But also, we have, with interventional radiology, I think we have a working relationship and a research relationship that is unique. And we've been able to do a great deal of work in expanding the field of interventional radiology and treatment for patients and conducting clinical trials. And, that's just been a wonderful opportunity, and working with really talented interventional radiologists who are leaders in their field. And so I think it's just this entire culture of collaboration and research development that exists. And, it really makes it so much more pleasant to be at work, even though, we're working with very complicated patients. And certainly that's not easy. It can be very stressful, but people really try hard to make it as comfortable as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, as we round out to the end of the interview, I have to say that I'm always surprised every time I kind of become the voice or the questions of an audience, and do these in-depth behind the scenes. It's outside of kind of the normal clinical thing. What excites you about what's coming down the line, or what specific clinical trials or technologies are you excited about? This is really more about who are you and what motivates you and what drives you. And, how do you see your contributions in light of all of the things that we've had to endure as a community? It always surprises me that common themes emerge about the person that I'm interviewing. And for me, really from the first question of, how you grew up and where you grew up, all the way to what brings you joy in work, for me, the common theme for you is always about community. And when you think about the Al Benson from the podium, I even remember the first time I reached out to you to join a publication group, this small little publication group, and I'm thinking, Dr. Benson's never going to join this group. It's like so little, and I come from such a little thing. And I remember being on the phone with you and asking you, and you saying, that sounds really interesting. Yeah, I'd like to participate in that. And getting off the phone, first taking a deep exhale, like, I got Dr. Benson to participate, but more realizing or feeling how approachable you were and how you were just ready to say yes. Like, it was almost, that's when you really look at the people who have made the biggest marks in our cancer community. The thing about them is that they are always looking for the way to say yes. And I appreciated that about you, and I continue to appreciate it about you in the way every question I ask, you always find a place to give credit to others and to bring others into the answer, and to just kind of reemphasize that nothing we do in cancer care is alone. Everything we do is about building those connections, those collaborations, so that we all kind of cross the finish line on behalf of the patient together. And I've loved that, getting to know that even more deeply about you. So on behalf of your community and the community of people that have been so affected by your impact in cancer, I do have to say thank you, because it means a lot to the little people that someone like you is always ready to say yes and is always ready to work together to do big things. So I do leave that with you from a listening ear. And
thank you. It's very nice.
Well, I want to end on a light note and ask you a question that I ask on nearly all of these Inspired Behind Behind the White Coat interviews, which is to share something that most people don't know about you, but it's to share something that would either make someone smile or say, I didn't realize that. Something that really most people wouldn't know about you. So if you wouldn't mind giving our audience the thing that most people wouldn't know.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. There probably aren't many people who know my, if I weren't a physician, I'd probably want to be a photographer or artist, but I don't get to practice that so much. So.
Yes, yeah. Well, especially with traveling, being on hiatus, it's probably even less that you get to pull out the old camera. But that is something, there's so many times where people say, oh, I would have been, or they have a collection of, I interviewed Lee Schwartzberg, who's a fellow NCCN panelist, and he has every printed journal since the beginning of the New England Journal of Medicine. Everyone on the wall, everyone he has. And I believe Wally Curran probably has been on different research initiatives, although I don't know if he's a radiation oncologist, but I think that maybe he might have, his was that he puts maple syrup on everything. So it's always wonderful to hear.
I did think of another, people who come to my office know this, but I have a very impressive collection of fossils.
Oh, yes, perfect.
Yeah.
That's a perfect no one would normally know.
Yeah, and I've collected all over the place, and now, for example, my wife always knows what to get me for Christmas. So I've got some really wonderful fossils, and I display a lot of them in my office.
Well, very good. Well,
which
thank
is
you.
the first thing people notice when they walk in.
Well, thank you for sharing it with the rest of us. And now for every listener, we know if we ever have to get you a gift, we know exactly where we could start the search. Well, Dr. Benson, thank you so much for spending your time with us. I know time is precious, and all of us have really realized how precious that time is now that we are all in this global pandemic together, navigating through. So I thank you for spending your time with us. I know that this is meaningful for a lot of people. They get to get up close and personal with mentors and with people that influence their life. And I know that that list is long when it comes to you. So I thank you for your time with us. And I certainly look forward to a time where I can run into you at an ASCO GI or an ASCO or the NRG meeting or somewhere. So again, thank you. Stay safe. Congratulations on that new baby on its way.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good evening.
You too.